Good day, Dragon Slayers. This is Tom Vitker and Mike Dallen. This is Martin Luther King Day. And Mike, I think you and I have a lot to talk about. One of the things I'd like to talk about is what happens when leaders become anti-heroes.
An
So
anti-hero,
let
like
me proceed with a few caveats. Our president's behavior in recent weeks has resurrected a lot of criticisms about his personality type. I will have to acknowledge I've never examined President Trump as a psychiatrist. I doubt if I would have that opportunity. But many of us who observe him see that he displays characteristics of pathological narcissism. What does that mean? Well, it means somebody who's so self-absorbed in their own interests that they lack compassion, and they may lack the capacity to fully anticipate the downstream consequences of their behavior. And I believe that's happening to our country right now. And I would say there are several things about President Trump that I know, Mike, you disagree with, but that I do applaud. I think he very much became a staunch ally of Israel without apology. He seemed to be able to be focused on domestic crime, and I think it was a good idea to be careful about how we allow people into this country. That is, we should be practicing what we did throughout our history, a practice of selective immigration. And I also think that if we're looking at irresponsibility, I believe that the whole issue of the border was surrounded by lies promoted by President Biden and Alexander Mayorkas. And what we're seeing right now operating in Minneapolis is part of the downstream consequences of that. However, there are several things about that provoke alarm. And Mikey, I'd like you to offer your perspective on that, because I find what's going on discouraging, disheartening, frightening.
I surely do. Uh, ICE is in New York now, in Manhattan, and they're terrifying people. But the rank and file Americans in this most immigrant-full, most immigrant-rich city in the country are very resistant to it. But I saw I saw people disagreeing over what I saw was a murder. Mrs. Good in Minneapolis was slaughtered by a badge-happy, jackbooted thug who shot her 4 times and then walked away saying, "Fucking bitch." I talked to an old friend who's a U.S. Marine veteran, fought in Vietnam, was a 25-year veteran of the Detroit Police. He deals in real estate now. He's a good guy, Irish-American cop, and we talked yesterday few times, and he's appalled by that. He was saying, "That's not policing. This is not how you do it." I've been reading a little bit about the recruitment for ICE and the training that they're giving these people, and I was surprised that something like half of the recruits are Hispanic, and they're joining a very few Black Americans, very few, and a lot of Southern whites. But people aren't exactly flocking to ICE, even with $50,000 recruitment bonuses. But the whole notion of this is it looks like a construction of a Praetorian Guard. To me, it smacks. I mean, I'm a Jew who came up in the shadow of World War II, and I think I'm maybe pathologically, possibly neurotically sensitive to the fragrance of fascism and Nazism. But this does strike me as a recruitment of a corps of brown shirts, loyal only to the president. And the president, you're talking about his psychological state. You know, we never really talk much about Biden's or Clinton's or Obama's psychological state, but with Trump, it comes up a lot. Today, outside the realm of ICE and immigration control, we see that he sent a letter to the prime minister, I think it was the prime minister of Norway, bitching about not receiving a Nobel Prize. And I mean, this is not normal behavior from a president of the United States.
I would say this. I felt slighted too.
Yeah, I could use a Nobel Prize or two. Why stop at one? This is nuts. We have
Well,
somebody.
there's a lot there about toy soldier stuff that is really ultimately, I think it will have its own logical consequences in that the paradox is more and more of his support will fall away. He actually has had the highest turnover of in his administration of any president ever. And I
Well,
think
and Trump.
a lot of people are leaving, but they don't want to be associated with it. Uh, U.S. attorneys, which are plum positions that have resigned in Minnesota, they don't want to be a part of it. And there's also the logical consequences of a foreign policy of bullying. I mean, are we going to be declaring war on Denmark?
Are we
And
going
then,
to destroy NATO?
yeah, and in the process destroy NATO? I don't think so. And I actually don't think the Senate will put up with that. I mean, that is just bizarre behavior. And as for his dialogue with Norway, that is absolutely insane. He may
You say
have
that as a psychiatrist? I
no
mean, is that a fair is that I'm
politically.
not trying to cross-examine you, but
No. Politically, I would say that that is so bizarre that it stretches credulity as to what his real motivation is. It's bullying. I mean, if you look at, I'm going to surcharge everybody who doesn't agree with me 25%. What's that going to do to our trade? What's that going to do to the dollar? What's that going to do to America? So it's as if we're witnessing the wheels coming off an administration that is fast falling not only into disrepute, but to ineptness. It won't be able to do anything. That is, it has such low credibility internationally that our alliances are going to fall apart. And it has so low credibility among the financial markets that they're going to suffer. I mean, witness what's going on right now with the Fed. Admittedly, I think that Jerome Powell had his thumb on the scale at the end of 2025 when he cut interest rates at that time. But the Fed has historically functioned best when it's been independent of political influence. So now we have people, paradoxically, people like me, supporting Jerome Powell and his right to dispute this bullying, even though I don't hold him in great honor any more than you and I dispute this. But I don't think Merrick Garland did himself a great service by going after devout Christians as terrorists. It makes no sense.
I don't remember that. I thought Merrick Garland's failure, and he did fail. He was a failed attorney general. His name is going to stink in history, but not as a dishonest man, as an overly punctilious operator who refrained from necessary prosecutions. He was so worried about the appearance. He wanted to be purer than Caesar's wife, and didn't prosecute when he should have. Same as Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general, who somebody needed to hang after the 2008 financial disaster that was based on fraud and deceit and liar loans and the like. And Obama and Holder never went after anybody. Nobody hung. I think that's really why we're where we're at. In fact, that terrible injustice was done. A lot of people made off with millions and millions, and nobody paid for it, and it convinced the American people that the system was crooked. The Talmud says that injustice drives wild animals into the world, that when people see injustice, that the world is when they see wrong being done, it makes them nuts. If you get a bit of that, you get people ready to eat each other alive. I think that really helps explain the Trump presidency, that people were just they thought the system was corrupt. But, there's something Trump is always occupying all the whole spectrum, all the space, and we just went after Venezuela and we committed war crimes, and there's no question about it. With the crime of perfidy and the law of war, where you send military might that is not labeled um, as belonging to one country or other. Um, we we blew up these people who might have been fishermen, maybe they were drug dealers. We don't really know who they were. Um, we rocketed their boats, and then we sent over aircraft unmarked aircraft, and finished the job that killed them. I mean, these people saw aircraft coming at them, and they didn't have American insignia, they were unmarked, and they blew them up. They killed them, and that's a war crime, and we're not even I mean, that's not even the first section of the news these days. But that's one of the things that's going on, and going after Venezuelan oil is everybody wants them most everybody except the Cubans want the Maduro government gone, but they're not going after the Maduro government. They're dealing with they decapitated the head of a mafia that's been running Venezuela, and they're ready to deal with the assistant capos.
because the motivation is the spoils of war,
Looks like it. Yeah.
which
Now
actually can only provoke cynicism on the part of any observer, which really comes back to you and me as people that are in dialogue and perhaps are slightly to one side of the spectrum or the other. What do conscious, aware people do right now? We protest the craziness of ICE. We protest the illegal incarcerations, and we do what we can to support political leaders on both sides of the aisle that are going to contain an emerging dictator.
I don't know. I have a friend who's a neighbor of a good friend of mine, and he's helped her out in snow and times of trouble. And I had posted things on Facebook, and he was saying I had Trump derangement syndrome, and that the 2020 election, when Biden won, was stolen from Trump, and that the June 6th riot or insurrection, uh, or as Trump would have it, love fest at the Capitol was a love fest, and it was a fraud to go after those people that we saw rioting. We saw them pounding the Capitol Police with clubs and bear spray and flagpoles and the like. And he swallowed the Kool-Aid, other people were saying. Trump came here to Detroit to speak to the Economic Club of Detroit, movers and shakers, plutocrats, and others. And he went on with his normal speech, the speech that he normally gives, which was all about me, 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 how he really won the 2020 election and how unfair people had been to him, and that he deserved the Nobel Prize, and that he was proud and pleased to have pardoned the people who rioted on January 6th, and um, then he went to a Ford plant where a neighbor of mine, actually, TJ, guy who lives a few doors down, called out to him that he was a pedophile protector. And the president of the United States, the leader, I mean, he's the leader of the free world, said, fuck you, and gave him the bird.
I could see it now.
Ford suspended the guy with pay. Which I worked on the line at Chrysler, and if that had happened to me, I would have been singing with joy because I call that a vacation, a suspension with pay. The UAW, the Auto Workers Union, is solidly behind him. And I saw there are two GoFundMe funds for this TJ, who has 2 young kids, he could use this, 700 or $800,000 that he's going to be getting for yelling pedophile protector. But then again, there's that whole business with the Epstein file, and the Justice Department announced that they were in no hurry to release the files. They're not coming out. There's a law that Congress just passed demanding the release of those files, and Justice was saying, "Make me." So this is real, this is uncharted waters, as you say. Tommy, I don't know what the hell we do. It's like being an Italian in Mussolini's time or a German in Hitler's. I have a good friend who's a fiduciary of our Rainbow Covenant, our First Covenant Foundation. Brilliant inventor, a Princeton PhD in nuclear physics. My good buddy, uh, and co-director, Robert Buxbaum, and he's voted for Trump 3 times, and he was begging me with some anger that I should write about Trump and stop just giving him little snippets where he made sound like I was irresponsible comparing Trump to Mussolini or to Hitler or to other authoritarians that give a reasoned analysis. That I can't even keep up with Trump. I mean, there's a new enormity almost every day. Where do you start with the war crimes? The retitling the Defense Department, the Department of War. I saw that would involve something like an $125 million printing bill, you know, to to retitle the things. Nothing done with the cooperation of Congress. And then in the larger context of all of this is a plutocratic takeover of the United States of America. We talk about the Gilded Age of the 1890s where you had the robber barons running loose and the people who worked for them. We've all seen those houses that they lived in, the maids and the stewards and the servants and the gardeners lived in these garrets for, very little money, while the principals lived lavish lives. Our country now is has got less economic equality running through it now than we did then because the fortunes of the great and mighty are so great and mighty. And I'm worried about that because quite a number of the top 10, Larry Ellison, the Google guys, Zuckerberg, some of the Microsoft people, and some of Elon Musk's people too, are Jewish. And I'm seeing a certain reaction against the Jews. I don't know how that's going to go. But we have plutocrats, and they are running the country, and they can run the country. And I mean, it's a fact that Elon Musk really did buy the election for Trump in an era where money talks and the Supreme Court has been stacked with extreme ideologically driven jurists. What are you and I gonna do? What are people who don't have the access to these media that you and I have, what are they gonna do? And I don't know. I gotta hand Aren't you impressed with the people who are out there demonstrating against ICE? I'm impressed with their courage.
Sure. I think there's also, I mean, what you and I can do is, as much as possible, find the truth and voice it. Support leaders that will contain this craziness. For my part, I'm looking for people who are sane enough to be able to collaborate with whoever the other side is so we can get beyond this. I think that I also am reasonably optimistic that there are knowledgeable people, Jamie Dimon and others, that do not look with favor on this craziness, people with reasonable wisdom in this culture that will not support it. And I'm hoping that the military has a bit more integrity than Trump believes it to have. That is, I think there are going to be people within the military that are going to stand up to this craziness and say, this is insane.
Well, they've gutted the Generals Corps.
Right.
So, I mean, they've already
But there's
purged.
still people out there. There are people out there that are retired that can be speaking out.
Well, you have to have a forum. Last night, I saw 60 Minutes, and it's not the first time that 60 Minutes it's a wonderful show. It has left me breathless,
I saw this
gasping.
I saw 60 Minutes last night too.
Is it's it almost makes you despair. I was shocked by, uh,
Well,
you
the torture in particular, I found disgusting.
in El Salvador,
Yeah,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
we are a party to that is not something that I think our country knows enough about,
no.
and if we knew enough about it, I don't think we could support it.
It's monstrous, and it violates the law again.
Well, not only that, Mike, think several generations down the road. If this is a country that does that, where do you think the sentiment of Latin America will be? We're tyrants.
Well, Latin America is already so extraordinarily screwed up, it's hard to even fathom how screwed up it is. I was coming down I was on a flight from Detroit to Mexico City. I was getting off in Dallas, and I was talking to this wonderful, Mexican engineer who's on his way home to Mexico City. He's a commuter in a way, and we're talking about, Mexican manufacturing, and, he's a car guy, you know, um, and the real affinities that Mexican people and Americans, North Americans have in common, and he's kinda, chiding me, "Why did Mexico how did Mexico lose Texas?" And of course I knew, I mean, I'm familiar with it. Well, because they wanted slavery, and well, of course, but then look at Mexico, and Mexico is the land of the never to be adequately damned Catholic Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition that has riddled the country, that is distorted and pathologized it since the founding of Mexico, from Columbus's time, and it's a disaster. It's been a disaster. They did everything they could to root out anything that they could recognize as Jewish influence, and they burnt people at the stake all the time for Judaizing. There weren't any Jews, but they found enough who were sliding around and people who were interested in the Torah, the Old Testament, because it's such a part of Christianity. But it's a disaster of a place, and it's been a disaster of a place, and it is, and so long as I mean, I keep going back to this one thing, but I think it's really important. So long as a place hates Jews, it's going to be a poisonous, lousy, murderous kind of place. So I'm not that worried about the Latin American peoples getting upset with us. I am very worried about the people who have always cooperated with the United States of America or who would be inclined to. I had some dealings with the CIA as I was getting out of law school, and I was thinking of a career with the CIA, and they had me reading stacks of books, as a possible agency recruit, and everything depended on getting volunteers to come aboard, and, and you can bring them aboard with money, but it's infinitely better to bring people aboard because they think you're good, that you are on the side of the good and the just and the kind, and it's made our operations, and to leave that behind, to abandon that, and to no longer be appearing to be on the side of the good and the just and the right is going to cost us intelligence failure after intelligence failure, and, intelligence failures are what gave us Pearl Harbor, they're what gave us 9/11 and the attack on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. They almost they were going to hit the White House. It was going to be, a decapitation event by the Simchas Torah, the October 7th attack on Israel was an intelligence failure. Intelligence failures can be really, really costly, and we are in line to suffer them all across the board.
Let me pause for just a moment because I got a technical problem here. It is now dark in Reno, so I better turn on the lights. Hold on. Okay, back to it.
I wondered what was happening. I couldn't understand why you were getting darker and darker, but it's night. Who would have didn't see that coming?
I hope people don't perceive that as arrogance at my defying God. I simply
King Canute, right, trying to keep
flipped the light
on,
switch.
see where you are.
Well, I think the rhythm of this is such that inevitably there are going to be opportunities for us to intervene on the side of sanity. This cannot go on indefinitely without leaders to come forward and start to make sense to most of us. My hope is that they do make sense, that they address the shared concerns of most Americans, and we begin to present a humane, enlightened face to the rest of the world rather than what we have right now.
Good country. I mean, we really are. This is Martin Luther King Day. And also the first day it was the first day of the month of Shavat, in the Hebrew calendar, which is a big deal. It harkens back to the plagues of Egypt and the great Freedom Festival where, slaves get free. We're a country that, I've always heard the United States means freedom. So, that's still there, it's still operating.
Good. So what do you have planned for next week, Mike?
Anything you want, I'm on call.
What are you going to be doing?
Well, I hope our newsletter will be out. The current newsletter, which it's been a long time, is I came back from the Far East and I came back thinking that the Asian religions are getting stale and people are getting sick of them and of all the man-made religions. And they are puzzled by Jews and Judaism, you know, the outcry against, alleged, genocide by Israel has focused people. They asked me, "What are you?" And I went, "Jewish," and that meant 0. People don't know much, but I went, "Hebrew." And they go, "Oh, not Israeli, Hebrew." "Yeah, yeah, 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 we got it." That they understood that, but I was talking to a guide in Bhutan who came from Buddhism and was surrounded by Hindu idols. And he was explaining, I don't do temples. I take tourists to temples. There are Buddhist temples all over the place, and I'm not into that. That's for the tourists. They like it. I believe in God, he says, and I believe in karma. And well, that is kind of roughly the religion of Israel. Just misses a few things, but that's kind of the essence of what we're all about, the God of Abraham and the God who's just. And I think people are, the Israel's in the news all the time. I was going to go to a Shabbos in Kathmandu. I love saying that, there I am in Kathmandu. I'm in Nepal by Mount Everest, but there I was.
Do you have a Bob Seger soundtrack playing in the
Right,
background?
it plays in my mind. Believe me, Bob Seger is a Detroit guy, Ann Arbor
I
guy.
know he's a Detroit guy, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, one of the great moments of my life was in Chengdu, China, and a little Chinese official asks, "Where are you going?" And I get to say to her, it was a wonderful moment I'll never forget. I got to say to her, "I'm going to Kathmandu," you know, you know. But they blew up the Chabad house, or they attacked the Chabad house in Kathmandu. somebody didn't like Jews and thought he would try to blow it up. And then in Bangkok, the Chabad house where I went, I left off a copy of Rainbow Covenant with them in their library. It's full of all these Israelis and really loud insecurity. We won't, characterize it, but you have to have that.
It would be a good promo if you could send a copy to the Dalai Lama.
I don't know if he's got it or not. I told you about the Dalai Lama's line. I quoted it in the newsletter. "What do you think of Western civilization?" They asked him. He goes, "Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea."
Great.
But I mean, but people see the Arab Muslim conspiracy to destroy Israel. But, they've subsidized the growth of this population that believes with all its heart that this little New Jersey-sized land is theirs. It's their inalienable inheritance, and the Jews are colonialist, imperialist, white, interlopers. Even if they come from Baghdad or Damascus, they're still they really belong in Poland, they say. This that Israel alone must guarantee these people's happiness. I think this is such a stupid idea, and the world is not full of stupid people. God doesn't make no junk, as they say. Um, and I think people will sooner or later perceive this risible nonsense of the Muslim and Arab world, that Israel must be destroyed to guarantee the rights of their brethren, their brethren whom they detest and abuse in denying equal rights to. I think the world will see through that. Anti-Semitism, Jew hatred helps make the Jews news, and I think that's a divine device, um, intended to bring people to, um, the Noahide laws of decency, to the God of kindness and justice and freedom, and I think we'll get there. I mean, I know we live in an anti-religious age, but I think, you know, I think people will begin to see through the defamations against, Torah. Our relatives grew up in a time when the principal idea of the Torah is that God created the universe from nothing, was risible, was regarded as just utter nonsense. I know Aaron did, and how could any sane person believe that? And then in 1948, 49, mostly Jewish scientists at Bell Labs detected background radiation of what? The Big Bang, the creation ex nihilo, Yesh Mayayin, you call it in Hebrew, something from nothing. And it's, I mean, maybe science is going to come up with some other idea, but right now, that's ground level basic science.
Well, the consensus of scientists is that this could not have happened spontaneously. I mean, it's like 1 in a trillion chance. So something was behind it. I would say I like the idea of praying for positive outcomes, because I think ultimately, if enough people do that, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, also, it helps you define what is a positive outcome. It
Right.
helps you visualize it and target it.
And I'm sure that's
I'm not
something
a
which,
psychiatrist, but
yeah, well, I'm with it there.
you do law, I do psychiatry. Yeah, it
Yeah.
works.
But I'm a psychiatrist of faith. It's perhaps rare, but we're out there. Good. Delighted to have you again, and also delighted to have somebody who can help lend sanity to this craziness. And if you don't mind, I'll write you in as my president next time.
No, no, not me. I tell you, being a politician is a really high level thing. I'm very impressed with the politicians
I
most of the politicians that I know. I mean, caring people. I had one politician who I would never, ever vote for, a local congressman. But in some things, this person is great and, a real policy wonk and believes in the principle of government exists to make things better for people. And it can and it should. And I mean, we should have government of and by and for the people. So, um, people in every generation have decried the lousiness of their politicians, but that's one of the reasons we read history to see, how people just disparaged Lincoln and George Washington too at times. Oh no, Washington, he's just in it for the expense account. Lincoln, they called him Honest Ape. That's what I'm saying.
If you read Lincoln's journals, he's incredibly articulate and aware.
And good.
Yeah. No, he
Yeah,
was a very decent human being.
he really was, but, people disparage their leaders, and it's, you know, and that's a fact. Again, democracy will put some really interesting people out there sometimes.
Okay, my friend, until next week, those of you who wish to support us, take a look at the book, The Rainbow Covenant and Dragon Slaying. And for all of you out there, be conscious, be well, be safe.
Amen.